Alaska has been an important player in CSG West. Over the years, we've had great leaders who've been in our organization. Senate President Stevens, for example, was our national chair at one point, but also former Representative Craig Johnson, who obviously I know passed away recently. And in fact, Representative Craig Johnson was chair of the West in 2014, and Gary Stevens is also at a national level, also chair. That was the last time we had a big meeting in Anchorage. We had over 1,300 folks in Anchorage that year from across the country. Now, next year, Senator Lukey Tobin is our chair-elect and will host our annual meeting in September of next year.
September of 2027.
Yes.
Will be in Anchorage.
In Anchorage, that's our largest gathering of Western legislators. It's a great opportunity to not only discuss key issues, but also showcase the great state of Alaska.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. Today, our guest is the director of the Council of State Governments West, Edgar Ruiz. The Council of State Governments, or CSG as it's called, is a nonpartisan national organization that connects and informs all three branches of state governments to help bring forth best practices. CSG is divided into 4 regions, and Alaska is part of the Western region. Edgar Ruiz has been the director of CSG West since 2011. He grew up in Southern California on the border with Mexico and began with CSG in 2002, managing American-Mexican programming for CSG West. CSG West runs a training program for new legislators called the Western Leadership Academy, WLA, which was a wonderful training program that I took part in as a freshman legislator. This interview took place in Juneau while Edgar was visiting the state capitol as part of his duties as director of CSG West. Edgar Ruiz, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you very much for having me here. Appreciate it.
Let's just start by learning a little bit about your early life. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in San Diego, right next to the U.S.-Mexico border. Actually, I was born in Mexico, in Tijuana, but I grew up in San Diego. And from that border area, people would go back and forth. And
you had family on both sides of the border?
Yes. And so it was very common for folks to cross over, meet family and friends, and then come back home. So
that is really interesting. So you kind of grew up in 2 different countries simultaneously.
Yes. And again, it was all part of one region. And in fact, a lot of the folks who live there really can, think about issues when it comes to water quality, air quality as one region, because issues with air quality don't know of any borders. So you really had to work together.
Right. And I'm thinking there's a lot of the news about the Colorado River, and because does it finish in Mexico or?
Yes, yeah. So part of the agreement is that because you have 7 states, upper and lower basin, and then under the 1922 compact, 1.5 million acre feet of water is supposed to be delivered to Mexico. And so it does. And so there's 2 states that are Baja California and Sonora. They get a portion of that.
And are we keeping our end of the deal? Are they getting that much water?
We are, but I think, one of the challenges right now, which is what all 7 states are in Mexico are in the process of trying to negotiate how are they going to be dealing with water shortages because of drought. And so in fact, there was a deadline that was supposed to occur in November, because we're right now, our states are operating under 2020 guidelines that expire at the end of this year. And if the states cannot come to an agreement, the federal government can step in and determine what those cuts will be, which is a big concern for states.
Yeah, my family moved back to Alaska. We were living in California, but I could not handle the stress of living in an environment where you were constantly seeing reporting that we were about to run out of water.
Yeah.
And again, it's just such a stressful thing.
Yeah.
To think that we're going to run out of water. It seems like there's been more rainfall in the past few years. There's been bigger snowpack, and that it hasn't been the same fears in the last few years, but maybe I've missed it. I mean, do you still feel like there's water stress in California?
There is, and all across the West, I would say. This year, we've been in Sacramento, we've been pretty fortunate. We've had a lot of rain, but the snowpack in the mountains has been very minimal. And so when you think about the late spring, summer months, that's a big concern. And then outside of California, our Western states have been pretty dry. For example, the Western Legislative Academy that you did, we
Colorado
Springs, and typically every December, you have a lot of fresh snow, and this last year was pretty dry.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So you graduated from high school in San Diego?
Yeah, went to Southwest High School there near the border.
What did your parents do?
So I grew up with my grandparents. My grandmother and my grandfather were immigrants from Mexico, and they were already in their 60s when they began taking care of me. And my grandmother's a homemaker. My grandfather worked in agriculture in California, in the Central Valley.
Were you raised like an only child by your grandparents?
Yes, yeah.
What was that like?
It was interesting. I mean, so I have siblings from both my mom and my dad, but I'm an only child. And I grew up with my paternal grandparents. And it was a unique experience in the sense that I had grandparents who really took care of me, provided, long support, but they were not, they didn't reach high school. Or school. So, trying to,
They didn't help you with your homework.
Correct. And they didn't speak English either. So I think also part of it was navigating that. But then also as I got older, being able to take care of that as well.
Did you translate for them?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I remember, even going to the bank all the time, just helping them with that and or any other things. And,
What's your earliest memory of having to go to the bank with your grandparents to translate?
God, I was probably six years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such an interesting thing. And I'm just thinking like my son, when he was 6 years old,
Yeah.
I don't know if he'd even have the vocabulary to like know how to talk about a bank, or like what's happening. So
Yeah.
you had to grow up fast and try to be responsible for that.
Yes. Yeah. And as they got, certainly as I got older and they did too, it's just obviously with age and they started getting sick. And so being able to take care of them as well.
So you graduated from high school and went straight to college?
Yeah, I went to a community college there in San Diego, Southwestern College, and went there for 2 years. And interestingly enough, right out of high school, I started working at the San Diego County Probation Department at a juvenile hall. At the time, I wanted to pursue a career in law enforcement. And so that was a wonderful experience. The county of San Diego had a program for student workers. And so as long as you kept with good grades in college and then worked for no more than 80 hours biweekly, then you were fine. But it was a wonderful experience because I got to interact with youth that were in, situation, obviously being in juvenile hall for a wide range of offenses. But it was also just a learning experience for me and such an interesting job.
I happened to be talking to your colleague Jonathan last night about young people in crime and seeing patterns and commonalities that those folks had. And I'll just say we were talking about it in the context of having had experience in the foster system.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you had any of those insights as well from those 2 years about like why those kids ended up where they were.
Yeah, no, and interestingly enough, I did 4 years. Throughout my college, I was going to college, I worked at the county probation department. And 3 of those years in an institutional setting. And I will say there were some commonality. A lot of kids came from single-family parent homes, grew up in communities that didn't have the same opportunities as others, and also kind of a cycle. I mean, some of the kids that were there, their brothers had been incarcerated, their parents had been incarcerated, and so there's sort of this cycle. And you saw that in some cases, we see, at the juvenile level, obviously your goal is to be able to help them get back to society, placing them with sometimes in group homes, but sometimes you see kids that would come back multiple times over the course.
Did that experience teach you that you really didn't want to go into law enforcement?
Yeah, actually, it was more of, you do those tests for color, and so I'm color deficient on green and red. And so they were able to give me an exemption at the county level, but I knew right then and there that I wouldn't be able to,
because you're
pursue.
colorblind.
Yeah.
Oh.
Then and there, I realized that I wouldn't be able to, if I wanted to work in the FBI or something like that.
I didn't know that. They don't accept people who are colorblind.
Yeah.
I did not know that. That's interesting.
So from there, I changed my major to political science. And during the last year, and I was already going to San Diego State, because I went 2 years community college, then transferred to San Diego State. I had to do an internship, and I pursued one with my local assembly member, which is like the House of Representatives here. And that was an eye-opener for me to state government, state politics, and being able to do it in the community that I grew up in. And especially having to have 4 years after working in law enforcement in the juvenile, it was great to be working in an area where you can actually put funding towards programs to prevent kids from being in juvenile services.
Yeah. So I just want to talk about California state government for a moment,
Yeah.
just so listeners here understand. California Assembly is like our state house.
Yes.
And how many assembly members are there?
There are 80 assembly members and 40 senators.
And each senator, I believe, represents more people than a U.S. House rep represents.
Correct.
So, yeah.
Yeah. So California, we're nearly at 40 million people in the state. So 40 senators, about a million each. And then the assembly members are roughly about 600,000 or so. So they're slightly larger than a congressional seat.
Really, for all intents and purposes, each of your assembly members is representing the entire state of Alaska.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just mind-blowing to me.
Yeah.
But anyway, so you were doing the internship for the assembly member who represented the area where you grew up.
Yeah. And then that led eventually to a full-time job in the office.
And you moved up to Sacramento.
No, I did it in San Diego. So
Interesting.
So I worked in the district office. And so it was a wonderful experience of just being able to understand state government, being able to deal with constituent inquiries. And in the California legislature, because each of the members have roughly about 10 staff at a minimum. When you look at their local district staff and their capital staff. So in many ways, you're kind of the eyes and ears of the member. You would go to the community and talk about what was happening in Sacramento with the state budget, or meet with education leaders about interests that they have. So it was just a wonderful experience.
I did not know that. So each assembly member has 10 staff.
At a minimum, yeah.
Wow.
And then if they're chairs of committees, my boss eventually became chair of the budget committee. So in addition to her staff, she also had budget staff that were part of that.
We have such a struggle in Alaska to find staff. And I don't know if you have having to have that many staff members for, I guess, 120 total legislators, if it's a struggle to find staff.
I think for the most part that you have the capital staff, which in the building in Sacramento, there's a lot of interest from folks who are just interested in government, right? And so there's also fellowships that the state has. They do a great job of bringing in talent from the local universities. And then at the local level in the district staff, a lot of it just local folks who, some of them work in a campaign for a member and then they transition to working for them in their offices.
So you might actually have, it's a competitive thing to get a job.
No, it is. And then in the building, it's always interesting because there is a track. I mean, there's staff who begin as field representatives, then they move up to chiefs of staff, or maybe they, if they have a particular interest in an area, they become the lead committee staff. So energy or water, and those are folks that the members really rely on, and who, as members move on, those staff are very critical. They have that knowledge base of information.
And at what point did you learn about Council of State Governments?
Yeah, so my former boss, she was active with CSG West in the late 90s. So in fact, she happened to host an annual meeting in San Diego, and I got to work on the host state staff at the time. And so that's how kind of I learned about CSG. And then when she was termed out of the state assembly, at that time I already had, did 4 years with her. She was termed, and then I had gone to graduate school at San Diego State Public Administration. So I wanted to pursue something in local government, sort of like a city manager track. So I ended up moving to Orange County, and that's when I worked there for as a management analyst in a small city, and got to work
your
on
municipal government experience.
Yes, and that was very eye-opening. And the good thing about the city is that it's not large. I got to interact with the different departments. So it included code enforcement, economic development, and redevelopment at the local level. And so, to the original question, with CSG, about 2 years later, I learned that CSG had a grant from the USAID to promote cross-border collaboration between Mexico and the United States. And so when I was working for the Assembly Member's Office, she represented the border district. And so I had interacted with officials from Mexico and do cross-border trade issues. So with the grant, this gave me an opportunity to take that experience, but in a broader level, 10 states, from Texas all the way to California.
And I mean, you were the perfect applicant because you'd grown up in both countries.
Yes, yeah. And so the language, and certainly just following politics in Mexico and in the U.S. So it was an interesting time. And even though there had been a lot of collaboration along the border, especially among the governors, the reason USAID was very interested is they really wanted to further relationships at the state legislative level. Because until that time, there was no mechanism of cooperation among state legislators, among the 10 states. So that's how I started working with CSG.
Right. So that was your initial job.
Yes.
It seems like the perfect job. And did you go to law school at that time, or when did you go to law school?
Yeah. So I started working at CSG for 2002. And I thought at the time, I went to Sacramento because I moved from Orange County to Sacramento. I thought, well, this is a 2-year grant.
Because CSG's office is based in Sacramento.
Correct.
That's so interesting that you worked for the state legislature based in San Diego and ended up moving to the Capitol to work for CSG. It's funny to me.
Yeah. And I thought, well, after the 2-year grant, I figured, well, I'll work in the building or something.
Right.
But as it just turned out, 2 years, that grant turned into 5 years, and then 5 to 10 because USAID really liked what we were doing among border legislators. They even asked us, well, can you do this among other officials? So we started bringing together attorney generals of the 2 countries, state attorney generals, state treasurers, and other officials. And so that really expanded.
Do you still follow Mexican politics?
Yeah. I mean, we still do a program. It's called the Border Legislative Conference, which alternates between U.S. and Mexico.
Well, if it's okay, because this is very Alaska relevant at the moment. So we held a hearing in House Judiciary last week about the deportation of a mother and 3 children from Soldotna, Alaska, the youngest being 5 years old.
Yeah.
But she had fled Jalisco to Soldotna. Everything, I mean, I won't go into the details, but the point is that she got deported back there with her children within like less than 48 hours notice, like basically detained and immediately back. And it was right at the time where the president of Mexico, Sheinbaum, had ordered the execution of the head of the cartel. And then it was like she was like in a war zone. She was like deported back to a war zone. Yeah. And I guess if I were to ask a question about Mexican politics, the way it's always been explained to me is that you don't cross the cartels, like that Mexico has like this sort of equilibrium where everything is fine as long as you don't cross the cartels. But from my limited knowledge, President Trump pressured President Sheinbaum to do this targeted assassination. Can you talk to any of that?
Well, I mean, certainly our 2 countries have been working on public safety, and for a long, long time. I know President Sheinbaum in particular, since she took office, it's almost a little more than almost 2 years now. She's been pretty proactive on going after cartel leaders and extraditing. That's another thing too, because in Mexico, there's a strong concern about extraditing officials because of the death penalty, because in Mexico, they don't have the death penalty. So
flesh that out for me. So there's opposition to extraditing because you don't want people to be exposed to the death penalty?
Correct, in the United States, yeah. But she's been more willing to extradite folks to the United States.
Where they face the death penalty.
Yeah.
I mean, I would say if they're extradited to Texas.
Correct. I mean, there's some conditions sometimes between the governments. But yeah, I mean, it's some of the work that we did in like the late 2008. Mexico was undergoing major change in judicial reform. I mean, they were transforming their system of justice from an inquisitorial system, like in most of Latin America. It's all paper written, right? So most prosecutors, when they present, it's all written to a judge who reads it. Well, they were shifting their system to more like the United States, where they were not going to have juries, but they were going to have
oral
arguments before a judge. And so that required a lot of reform in their system, which also in training, and that's where we came in, because we help facilitate training among forensic scientists. So they're working with the officials from here in the States, with the prosecutors, and also defense attorneys and judges. So, and they were doing that all within what they were able to do in like 7 years. It's pretty impressive, given if you look at the United States, we've had our system of justice for now almost 250 years. And so they were doing it with the support of the United States, of course. But obviously, with Mexico applying we were not dictating, the United States were not dictating how they were supposed to do their system, but helping them out and giving them sort of here's what's worked in the United States as sort of best practices. But in that, there was also officials that we lost in the war on drugs, who were well-meaning officials, prosecutors who, unfortunately, because they were doing their job, got killed. And that was really sad to see. And that's something that Mexico's been facing for quite some time.
Right. Well, I mean, the reporting that I saw, there was like the cartel specifically was going after folks in military uniforms. So there was the deaths of, I guess, National Guard members in Mexico. And, I don't know if you can say that maybe they shouldn't have done this particular assassination. I mean, because it just created so much chaos, and I mean, what I think were a lot of good people were killed. Yeah. But hindsight's 2020.
Yeah, it's I think the president obviously they had intelligence of whereabouts of this individual who had been on the run for many, many years and wanted by both governments, of course. And so I think that was an opportunity, and obviously the president agreed to do it. But yeah, a big concern now is in this, what happens now. Now you have cartels, leader within the cartel that are trying to vie who's going to, come up, because it's sort of like whack-a-mole, get one, and then that's been the history too. And we've seen that over the years. And then other cartels as well that will want to rise in that vacuum. And so we've seen in the past where, before there's a call to that, there's some more violence. And so that is a concern for, not only the Mexican government, the U.S. government too.
So I did a series on my podcast of folks leaving the country. Mm-hmm. And there are people from Alaska who in the last year, for different reasons, moved to other countries. And I did an interview with someone who'd actually been living in Mexico for 10 years. I won't go into the details of their story, but in part, they turned 65 and they qualified for Medicare. Mm-hmm. And they said that in Mexico, the way health insurance works is actually really cheap when you're younger. And the older you get, it gets more expensive. And they turned 65 and it made sense to them to come back to America to qualify for Medicare. But basically, I had lots of questions like, well, is it safe for Americans to move to Mexico? Is it safe to be in an expatriate community? And they were like, absolutely. It's wonderful. It's like the greatest experience of your life. But then when you see the news from like last week and the cars burning and the streets closed down and Puerto Vallarta, just a mess, you're like, I'm not moving there. But they said that, from their perspective, the border is completely different than the rest of Mexico. That I don't know if you can speak to any of that about what we see on TV and what we read in the newspaper is not Mexico.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, in Mexico is obviously a vast country, and you do, just like even in the United States, you have areas that are just a higher level of violence or crime. But yeah, obviously, Puerto Vallarta is a good example. I mean, for many years, a lot of Americans have flocked there, retire there, and they find it very safe. And obviously, what's happened the last couple of weeks, that was sort of a shock, and it certainly caused a lot of consternation among folks, and sort of thinking, hey, is this something when I continue to live here? So obviously, I think this was the challenge for the government of Mexico to ensure that they provide security and a sense of security for folks. And I mean, obviously, since 2 Sundays ago, the violence has reduced, no other incidents, but I'm sure if you're living there and having that exposure to that, it's definitely, you would think twice. But obviously, there's a lot of collaboration with our government, the State Department, particularly the U.S. Embassy, obviously informs on Americans about, situations. But again, it's just like anywhere else, being diligent about where you're at and being aware is very important. I mean, Mexico City is a good example. It's like the center. You have almost 25 million people in Mexico City, kind of the area, and still one of the most safest cities in the world. But also there's also pockets of areas that be very careful.
So back to you in Sacramento, working for CSG. I just thought it was so interesting that you went to law school. You didn't practice law. So just talk a little bit more about that decision and what it meant.
Yeah, I had always wanted to go to law school. I always had an interest in the law. In fact, I remember when I used to work in the assembly member's office in the late 90s, we would have this stack of law books, and I would use them all the time, even to help on responding to inquiry. So I always had an interest in the law. And so I was already working for CSG, but I thought it'd be great just to have that experience. So Lincoln Law School in Sacramento is more for folks that are working full time. So your traditional law school experience, if you do full time, is 3 years. So I did 4 years because I had to do it at night after work, doing sort of night school. So, but it was a wonderful experience, and I gained a lot out of it. A lot of the professors in that program are practicing lawyers. They work in the local DA's office.
So like teaching at night.
Yeah, they're judges. And so it was a very practical experience. And I use a lot of the skill sets. Issues like contracts, of course, but also just the federalism issues and constitutional law, which is in the work that we do at the state level is also very important. We advocate, CSG advocates on behalf of states. And so,
well, if you hadn't stayed with CSG, do you think you would have done the bar and become a lawyer?
Possibly. Yeah.
You became director of CSG in 2011?
Yes, 2011.
Yeah. CSG West, I should say.
Correct.
Yeah. I guess explain what CSG is, Council of State Governments, and what the role of the director is.
Sure. Council of State Governments, it's a regionally based national organization that was established in the 1930s, 1933 to be exact. And the idea behind it was just states at the time had different tax policies. And our founder, former senator from Colorado, Henry Toll, thought it would be great to bring legislators together from across the states to share, best practices. And also at the time, this was at the time of the Great Depression, there was a more proactive federal government. And so there was also a need to have the states to have a voice as the federal government was growing to meet obviously very important needs at the time. So that's kind of how CSG evolved. It really involved not only legislators, but also at our national level, other state officials, so governors and state treasurers and a host of others. Over time, the organization evolved to what is now kind of more regionally based. And so in the late 40s, you have the development of the regions of CSG. And so what we do at a regional level is provide a space for legislators and legislative staff to come together to address issues of common interest. And I think that regional structure is unique because issues that you face here in Alaska or we face in California or Utah are going to be very unique compared to other parts of the country, especially when it comes to water policy, federalism. In most of our Western states, the federal government owns a big chunk of federal land. And so that poses some challenges in some cases and opportunities to work with. But that's unique compared to other parts of the country. So we provide a space for folks to come together. We're supported by the states themselves. States pay dues to CSG for operations. But we also do a lot of training for legislators and legislative staff. You went through one of our...
I did, Western Legislative Academy.
Which is our flagship program for newer legislators. And in fact, we just celebrated 25 years of the Western Legislative Academy.
Yeah, so I'll say, just for listeners, that former Alaska State Senator Liesl McGuire was president of Western Leadership Academy. Former Alaska Representative Garen Tarr was president of Western Legislative Academy. Yeah. Well, class president, I should
Correct,
say.
yeah.
Class president. And then most recently, Elise Galvin, who's currently Alaska State House Representative, was elected Western Leadership Academy president. So we've had some folks get elected president of their class and make an impression that way. The structure of that training is, really how do we do good policy in a nonpartisan way is how I would summarize it. Yeah. And one of the, I think, sort of the big reveals of that is that no one really tells their party affiliation. You find out on the last day. And so that you get to know people and talk about issues with people without party being part of it. And I'm curious, in just your experience of being associated with CSG since 2002, do you feel that's become more challenging, or has it always been challenging?
I would say it's always been challenging, but I'll say it's probably become more challenging in the last probably 10 years or more. Part of it is, we looked at the federal government, always a lot of dysfunction there, folks not working across the aisle, or even members being criticized for going to have dinner with folks on the other party. And so over time, we saw some of that trickle into the state legislatures. And so, which is why we believe, as an organization that believes in good governance and in, bringing people together, that programs like the WLA are so more important than ever. And that would, 25 years of this program, we're always fine tuning it. And at the time, the reason why we created that program in the first place is because back in the late 90s, across the West, there was a big movement for term limits. Most of those were by ballot initiatives. And so the voters passed those. And so in late 1990s, 10 of our 13 states had term limits. And so that's why our leadership of the organization felt it was important to have a program like the WLA. Now, fast forward to where we're at now, we're down to 5 states that have term limits. Some of those states, either they were found unconstitutional or members of the public, reverse course. And so
I'll speak about term limits just for a second, because when I was a freshman, I actually introduced a term limit bill. But I think what's interesting, and by the way, we very generous. We were doing 12 years in each body.
Okay.
So you could serve a total of 24 years.
Okay.
Which is pretty generous. However, I will say that my thinking on term limits has evolved by being here. I'm in my 4th year and I still feel new. I still feel like I don't really know exactly how to simultaneously pass good legislation, hold hearings that are, providing proper oversight of the executive branch. I'm learning how to do all of that stuff in real time, and I could see how I'll be better at this in year 6. If I get reelected and I stay, I will be much better at this job in year 6 and probably have some degree of mastery in year 8, which by most state standards, the term limit would have already kicked in.
Correct. Yeah. It's, when you mentioned this, because policymaking is complex. I mean, and obviously we have legislators who come from different backgrounds all across the West, ranchers, lawyers, teachers. But then obviously you're sitting in a body like this, dealing with bills or issues that you may not be very familiar with. And that's where you rely on your colleagues, committee chairs and others.
Experienced staff.
But that takes time. And that's why, having that experience is so critical in our Western states.
Does CSG have a policy against term limits?
No, we don't. No. And in fact, for anytime we have an executive committee comprised of legislative leaders from across the West, which includes the presiding officers and minority leaders. So by design, we're very bipartisan, and unless collectively they have a position on something that we don't obviously have. Our role is to really be a convener, provide research. But there are some instances and over time that where our Western states have felt very compelled to take a stand or at least inform Congress, for example, on a particular issue. And so whether it be public lands or flexibility on federal programs, obviously not every state's the same. So sometimes we're asking for flexibility among federal agencies, a particular issue that or program that they're doing.
So I'm going to ask a question that you may not feel comfortable answering, but my assumption in the past few years is that it's not very difficult to recruit Democrats to participate in CSG and CSG trainings, and that it's more difficult to get equal participation by Republicans. And I'll say that based on conversations that I've heard from some Republican colleagues who choose not to participate in CSG, that engaging in this sort of training to be more bipartisan or nonpartisan, engaging in this sort of talking across the aisle, having dinner with each other, collaborating together, is in and of itself leftist. And that it's somehow anti-conservative to do this at all. And that could just be my read on it, and it could be very Alaska specific, but I don't know if there's any truth in that.
Our data from WLA over the years is that, yeah, in some cases, some states you'll have more Republicans in from one state, and then others will. But as a whole, it kind of evens out. And this is where, again, for the WLA, this is where we rely on leaders from our states who make those selections, and we always encourage them. We don't dictate who they select for the WLA. We just encourage them to look at bipartisanship and other factors as well, whether they're from urban areas or rural areas. So that way we have a wide range of membership in the WLA. So again, it's the West is kind of out of all the regions of CSG, we're probably the more politically balanced region in the country. When you look at states and like the majority in their states. So obviously states like Wyoming, it's Republican majorities,
Right, super
majorities. And then you look at Oregon and Washington, which is the opposite.
And California. And Hawaii.
Yes. So it's kind of almost halfway.
So you're kind of balanced with very Democratic heavy, very Republican heavy. But then you come to Alaska where it's half and half.
Yeah.
And I'll just bring this up because I sat on a panel at CSG WUS annual convention in Jackson Hole this past summer. And I said it out loud when people said, well, how do we do this in our state? And I was like, you need to be half and half. Like for us in a body of 40, it's basically 20 on one side and 20 on the other. When you're in a situation where you have to find compromise in order to create a majority, you will find that. Although I don't even know if we ever even talked about what Minnesota did, where Minnesota had shared power, like they were few, you know what I'm saying? They kept in their own and they had sort of the shared power agreement. I don't think that we've ever done that. We've always sort of found a way. We have the rural legislators who are willing to break off. And so we've always had this model of creating bipartisan or tripartisan majorities. But I guess the point of all of that is that Alaska's not doing something strange and unusual. It's just that we are really split almost exactly down the middle. Yeah. And so we have to find this way forward.
Yeah. Well, and obviously it is the coalition majority you have is very unique. It's obviously, that's why there was a lot of fascination with that. And so as I would talk to legislators in other states, like, wow, they talk about the Alaska experience. So hence we had last year at our annual meeting, just this panel where you and your colleagues were able to talk about the how it's working here in Alaska. And I think that also brings a lot of hope, and I think just a lot of interest among other Western states. The only other state that I can think of, Oregon, at one time, they had an even split. And so what they agreed to do, they had a co-speakers.
Oh, interesting.
And so it was unique. And I think this must have been about 15 years ago. And so at first, a lot of people were very concerned. How is that going to work? We're having two speakers. But in the end, those two speakers just had the personality and ability to work very well together, and they made it work. And in hindsight, a lot of people who I talked to from that period say that was one of the most productive legislative sessions they've ever had. And so they made it work. And again, sometimes it's because it's just the circumstances demand that the body approach it that way. And so, yeah.
Thank you so much for being on the show today. Is there anything I didn't ask you about that you wanted to talk about?
Yeah, well, just I would add in, Alaska has been an important player in CSG West. Over the years, we've had great leaders who've been in our organization. Senate President Stevens, for example, was our national chair at one point in 2014.
Wasn't he the national chair when you were selected as the director, or was he on the executive committee or something?
Yes, he was on the selection committee. Yes, yeah. And but also former Representative Craig Johnson, who obviously I know passed away recently. And in fact, Representative Craig Johnson was chair of the West in 2014, and Gary Stevens is also at a national level also chair. So instead of having back-to-back meetings, they talked and figured out to do a joint meeting, and that was the last time we had a big meeting in Anchorage. We had over 1,300 folks in Anchorage that year from across the country. Now next year, Senator Lukey Tobin she's one of our officers right now. She's our chair-elect, and as of January of next year, we'll be transitioning to chair, and we'll host our annual meeting in September of next year.
September of 2027
Yes.
will be in Anchorage.
In Anchorage, that's our largest gathering of Western legislators. It's a great opportunity to not only discuss key issues, but also showcase the great state of Alaska and also be able to tap into some of the experts that you have, whether it be from universities, from the private sector, and others, and just being able to really enrich our program and be able to highlight what are the key issues in the state of Alaska.
Well, Director Ruiz, thank you so much for being on the show today. And I hope you have a good last couple of hours in Juneau before you head out.
Thank you for what you do.
Thank you. As was just mentioned, former Representative Craig Johnson of South Anchorage passed away at the age of 72 on February 26th. Craig was the Rules Chair in the House during my freshman year and sat next to me in House Judiciary for my first 2 years. Craig was born in Kermit, Texas, November 22nd, 1953. Ever since the discovery of oil on the North Slope, Alaska has had an overrepresentation of Texans moving here, but the number of Texans in the legislature has dwindled over the years. Craig and I referred to each other as Texas, because we were 2 of 3 legislators who'd been born there. Of the 60 legislators serving today, now only myself and Sarah Vance of Homer were born in Texas. As you heard in this interview, Craig Johnson served as the chair of CSG West the last time Alaska hosted a CSG conference. I want to thank Craig Johnson for his service and say goodbye, Texas. You'll be missed. Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@aklug.gov or call 907-465-4940.